Well, hello, folks. Welcome. And today we're going to explore a new way of thinking about utility vegetation management, or UVM. I believe it's a forward-looking practical approach that replaces what I would consider the outdated cycle approach to UVM and replaces it with meaningful proactive strategies. I call it the proactive UVM model. So why are we here today watching this video? A while back, my good friend Josh Beaver, the incoming president of the UAA, reached out after reading my recent LinkedIn post about a report I had just released. Josh asked if I would be able to do a UAA webinar on the subject, and I told him I was planning to do a video, so why not do both at the same time? Little background, the post on LinkedIn seems to have gotten quite a bit of circulation. I think it's up to over 10,000 views at this point. And I received a bunch of requests for copies of the report. The people who got the report were utilities, regulators, and quite a few service providers working in the UVM industry. And based on the feedback directly to me, it appears many of the ideas resonated with them, and interest has been growing quickly. That includes utilities, regulators, and service providers, and they're starting to take notice. And that's why we're actually here today. Quick word about the report. The report is about 60 pages long. It's 60 pages of analysis focused solely on distribution UVM, not transmission UVM or the bulk electric power systems. I'll be talking a bit about those in the presentation. This is not a commercial product. It's free and it's available to anybody who wants to read it. Just email me at the address. So, for those of you that have read the report, I know you know it covers a wide variety of issues. And when it comes to summarizing all of that, let's begin with the end in mind here. My bottom line on all of these issues is that we must shift from being reactive to being proactive in our UVM programs. Our current model isn't just outdated, it's inadequate. The risks are growing faster than our budget, and the tools to solve these problems, interestingly, already exist. We just need to use them a bit differently. The best place, I think, to start here is, what do I mean by a reactive UVM? And I think the best place to start is this picture taken just a few steps from my backyard, looking down the street where I live here in Sonoma County, California. This, by the way, is also indicative of what you'd see along streets all around Sonoma County. Let me tell you why I consider this reactive. Every year, the utility sends out inspectors at least once a year, but more often than not, 3 times a year, because I'm in a fire area here. They send out certified arborists and look for clearances. They also look across the street, see if there's any hazard trees that could possibly fall into the lines. And after those frequent inspections occur, they send crews out to do the identified work. Now, I'm going to add here and come back to this in future part of the presentation, but also I can walk just a half a block and I can find where new tree planting occurred directly underneath the power lines. And it's a redwood tree. Hopefully you all know how big redwood trees can get. But the bottom line is, UVM on my street is reactive. We see the same problems year after year. Let me give you another example of what I would consider reactive UVM. This is a picture taken from Google Earth back in June 2017. As I mentioned, utilities here inspect all the lines at least once a year, and more often than not, 2 or 3 times a year. During this inspection, if I was the pre-inspector, I would have said, wow, this is great. We got a fence, we got a transmission line with distribution underbuilt, no problem here, no work is necessary for vegetation management. Let's move forward a bit in time, up till March 2019. Same location, and what you'll notice here is they planted a bunch of redwood trees directly underneath and adjacent to the transmission with distribution underbuilt. And you'll also notice off in the distance, there's construction trailers there. Once again, starting in 2019, when this was probably done, every year since then, we would have been inspecting these lines by certified arborists looking to comply with all the laws here in California. Fast forward to March 2021, they've now installed a new fence, and they are in earnest building this brand new home out there. Once again, remind you that this is inspected once, twice, or 3 times a year. Fast forward to February 2023, the house and the landscaping are complete. And I would add that while it's not in this picture, the people who built that house and were responsible for planting the redwoods planted more redwood trees directly underneath behind me in the picture. You just don't see them here. This is reactive. And this is the latest picture, July 2024. As you can see, the redwoods are creeping closer to the distribution lines, which will trigger ongoing and repeated line clearance work at this location. This is where it starts to become a reactive program. While we won't be pruning trees there for a couple of years, within a short period of time, that's going to happen. And I can pretty much guarantee you when that happens, the people are going to complain that we topped their ex-current redwood trees. So this is my point. This is what a reactive program is. Let's talk about what a proactive UVM program would look like. If the utility had a proactive program in place, the inspectors that went out there 1, 2, 3 times a year would have said, hey, somebody planted redwood trees directly underneath the lines. If I would have inspected that property, that would have been a red flag for me. And I would have looked off in the distance and noticed there were some construction trailers there. Obviously, they were beginning to start work on the house. What I would have done at that point is went to the construction trailers and asked them what they were planning on building at this property. And then I would have very politely said, you need to remove those trees from underneath power lines because we're not going to provide service to a house that has created a hazard, a fire hazard in Sonoma County, California. So those little redwood trees need to be replaced with something more suitable. I would have provided them a list of suitable trees for planting underneath the power lines. And they probably wouldn't have argued with me and removed those trees. If they had argued with me, I would have said, listen, bottom line is we can't provide you power if we have an existing hazard in place that you refuse to mitigate. So what a proactive model involves is ending the planting of wrong species under or near power lines. It involves thinking years ahead, not just to the next inspection cycle or pruning. And it involves eliminating predictable risks before they grow. I want to stop here a second and talk a bit about the rule of 70s. For those of you that listen to my podcast, you'll know that I had an episode that talked about rule of 70s. And what that means basically, it's an investment term, that if you get 10% compound interest on your investment every year, at the end of 7 years, you will have doubled your money. So what does that have to do with vegetation management? Well, I have been doing benchmarking with utilities since the year 2000, consistently for, it's recently been taken over by Stevens Point, and they've continued that benchmarking effort. But in the early years, I often asked the 60 plus participating utilities how many new trees were planted or started to grow into your inventory every year. And all but one of the utilities said they don't track that. In other words, they don't know how many new trees. The one utility that did track that number said that they added 10% every year to their work inventory. Now, if you think about that for a second, if they don't have a 10% removal rate, if they are not removing that many trees, they will, in essence, double the entire workload of their UVM program in a short 7 years. So let's move on here and let's actually move back to my neighborhood here. When I first started looking at this stuff, and scratching my head saying, geez, what was here first, the trees or the power lines? Well, I went and walked up and down my street and found the earliest date nail on those distribution poles, and it was 1971. Now, being an arborist, I know that the vast majority of those trees were only planted within the last 30 years. In other words, all of the trees you're looking at right here and the trees across the street that are all large enough to fall into the power lines were planted after the poles were there. A proactive program, once again, would be to end the planting of the wrong trees in the wrong place. We should have, when we built these lines out here, and when we got an application for new service to customers who are building houses, we should have been asking them at that point, before we get provide service to you, we have to know exactly what your proposed landscaping is going to be on your property, what species of tree. And if you don't know what you're planting, if you're just planting what's available at Costco or something, we'll give you a list of trees that are suitable to be planted there. And my frustration is this, because every time I look down my street, I realize that had we just had conversations with the customers prior to them installing their landscaping, we could have avoided the overwhelming majority of this work. Once again, that's what proactive UVM is. So what's holding us back? I'll defer once again to the benchmarking we've done. When I asked utilities in the past, why don't they do more in preventing this kind of stuff from happening? They always say we don't have the funding, we don't have the support from upper management, we don't have the staff to do the work. Well, my feeling is these are symptoms of a broken model. They're not good excuses. One of my arguments here, and this may make you feel uncomfortable because it requires some self-reflection regarding your UVM program. First of all, I'd ask you the general question. What do you think your job is in running a vegetation management program at a utility? I would argue that the mission of every utility vegetation management program out there should be to provide safe, reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally compliant energy consistent with best practices and regulations. Did I make that up? No, I didn't make that up. What I did was look at the mission statement of a bunch of utility companies out there, and also the mission statement of the regulators who oversee those utilities, to come up with this generic mission statement. So you got to ask yourself, if that was our mission and has been for the last 100 years, because we've been doing UVM for well over a century now, how good are we doing? How good of a job are we actually doing? I think the answer is quite sobering when you look at the results of us spending 100 years trying to achieve that mission. Tree-related outages are still the #1 cause of service interruptions during routine and abnormal weather conditions. Trees are still taking up power more than anybody else. In addition to those manifestations of problems and outages, we now have public safety power shutoffs in fire areas in northern North America, where we know that if we experience a red flag day, we better shut off the power before a tree falls into the lines, causes a spark, burns down an entire community. So now we have PSPS events, so we shut the power off even more. Moving forward to that discussion about wildfires, they're getting worse. In my 40-year career, I've spent a great deal of time defending utilities and service providers in court after major fires. The problem is getting significantly worse. It's much more damaging. It's much more threatening. We're taking more lives and we're burning down a lot more property. So things, when it comes to providing safe energy, when it comes to wildfires, we're not doing a particularly really good job at this point. We now also have wildfire mitigation plans. For those of you in wildfire-prone areas, the utilities are now compelled by the regulators to produce WMPs. For anybody that does that, you'll, I'm sure, be saying, I spend a great deal of time doing it. There's a lot of work involved with developing a WMP, but the most important part is developing it, and then complying with what you put in there. Next, moving on, we say our job is about safety. Well, that includes safety of the workers, and it includes safety of the public. We are still having problems with our workers getting injured and electrocuted. This work is some of the most dangerous work of any industry out there. And it's not just the workers who are coming in contact with lines. It's also private citizens, children climbing trees. I just read last week a case in Florida where somebody was climbing a tree and got electrocuted. Next is this whole issue of existential risk. I'm blocking the slide right here, but my point is this. Utilities in California definitely, but this is spreading to states like Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, other fire-prone states where the utility is basically held responsible for any fire and any subsequent damage as a result of a tree falling into a power line. The argument in court is you should have known it was your job to provide safe, reliable energy. You knew trees fall into power lines, and you didn't remove that tree knowing full well that it would be subject to an 80-mile-an-hour wind coming in from a different direction. This threat is real for utilities. You can ask Warren Buffett about his investment in utilities. My understanding is he has certain regrets right now, not fully understanding the liabilities associated with wildfire. It is a big issue, and it's getting worse. So my argument with this slide is things aren't working correctly, and the question is to you, do you think you're doing a great job and making a great deal of progress? So let's move forward. What is the first thing I think we need to do, and I cover this in the report, is we need to define the full scope of the utility forest. It's a term I have not heard much bantered about within the industry, but the utility forest to me is the forest we're responsible for. Now, shift your attention to the picture on the side. I would argue that when it comes to 200 kV and above, we have defined the utility forest when it comes to transmission. We've defined it by adopting the standard FAC 003, by adhering to IVM and wire zone border zone approaches to our easements. And this has worked. This has worked. The combination of FAC 003 and the great work of our researchers and coming up with new ways to handle transmission, vegetation management, we have been able to all but eliminate any trees growing into power lines. The only remaining problem with the transmission utility forest is off right-of-way trees. And if you look at the NERC outage or NERC violations, you'll find that the majority of violations right now on our bulk electric power system come from off right-of-way trees that actually appear healthy. Good news is there are some efforts underway in Washington to seek to expand the rights of utilities to address these trees in the future. But what we're here today to talk about is distribution. My definition of what the distribution utility forest is, it's all vegetation that could impact the delivery of energy. That's whether positively or negatively. And when you start to look at it like that you're responsible for all of the vegetation that could impact you positively or negatively, I think you get a different perspective on what you should be doing out there. It's not just what's in our easements. And I need to be abundantly clear, even if we don't own it or have documented rights, we're still responsible for managing it. I'll get into that a bit more further along in the presentation. So this is my picture of what a healthy utility distribution forest is. It involves right tree, right place, trees for energy conservation, removal and replacement programs, filling empty spaces, defensible space, which is something I'll explain to you for those of you that aren't in fire-prone areas. These are proactive strategies we already understand but fail to implement consistently. I have been very vocal about my belief that when it comes to things even like right tree, right place, We talk a lot about it and we put it on our websites. We have brochures and stuff like that, but we're not doing everything necessary to fully implement those kinds of things. So let's move forward and talk about each of these individually. When it comes to right tree, right place, I think the first thing we need to do is be very clear on what the definition is of right tree, right place. And we need to come up with a consistent definition and we need to stick to it. Right now, there are websites out there that I've viewed recently where utilities say it's okay to plant a 60 to 80 foot tall tree as long as it's 20 feet off to the side of the power line. It isn't okay. And it isn't okay because we can't predict under abnormal conditions whether that's going to fall over during a red flag event. If that tree falls over during a red flag event, you'll not only burn up that property, you could burn up an entire community. I would argue, and in the paper I do argue, there is zero reason why anybody would plant a tree that at maturity would either grow into or fall into the power lines. Okay, so what do we need if we have the definition that right tree, right place should be no tree planted that can grow into or fall into power lines? How do we take actions to do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is start making sure this shows up in every local tree ordinance. Myself and the people at UVMI at Tulane University have been working with Arbor Day Foundation to come up with a consistent definition. It would be my hope that once that definition is in place and we have a model tree ordinance, we can get all of the Tree City USAs to agree that they need a provision in their local tree ordinance that says they will plant the right tree in the right place. Beyond that, I think, yes, we should consider and possibly go after state and federal legislation. This is a big deal, and tree and power line related fires are drawing the attention of both state legislatures, but also at a federal level and agency level. This is where we kind of shift again from reactive to proactive. When it comes to right tree, right place, I would suggest that all of utility construction and maintenance standards must address this. And let me see if I can explain what I mean by that. In the example earlier, I told you that if I had spotted those redwood trees, I would have told the customer, we're not going to provide you service if we know we're turning on service to a place that causes a potential of a fire, long-term fire. We need to adjust our construction, maintenance, and new business strategies and practices to ensure that we actually, at the time of building new lines, whether it's a new single-phase line or we're providing service to a new construction, we need to incorporate right tree, right place into those practices. And finally, the other thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to build a robust funded removal replacement program. I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes here. Moving on to trees for energy conservation. If we go back to our mission statement and start thinking it a bit more globally about what our job actually is, utilities, and I don't know very many utilities that don't get this pressure, are compelled to provide their customers with ways to reduce their energy costs. Here in California, which is probably some of the highest electric costs anywhere, and it's going up, utilities are required to help customers reduce those. And what we know as arborists, people in this industry, we know that trees for energy conservation can do that. What I am suggesting here is we need to include trees for energy conservation as part of our routine inspections. If we're sending out a certified arborist to a property and they're looking to identify improperly planted trees, clearance issues, hazard trees, etc., why aren't they also taking the time to see if there's an opportunity to go to the customer and say, hey, if you plant a deciduous tree at this location, you could reduce your heating bills or your air conditioning bills by 20%. That should be part of what we do, and that's, I would say, is part of what our responsibility is in managing the utility forest. We also need to come up with programs. If we're going to have a tree replacement program to remove incompatible vegetation, We should also be taking the same time to say, you know what, let's not plant a low-growing tree here. Let's plant a tree here that will save you money. This needs to be part of the dialogue. It needs to be part of every program. It should be incorporated in new infrastructure planning. For those of you that still build overhead distribution lines for subdivisions, you know there is a point there where there is zero landscaping. But what we do know is where the houses are going to be built. And it's at that time the utilities should be talking to the developers and following that, the homeowners, about how they can save energy by planting trees in the right place around their property. Finally, we need to do a lot more with customer education efforts regarding this. I think Arbor Day Foundation, Davy Tree definitely has invested money in this. This is a big deal because we do need to start paying attention to how we can reduce cost and, equally important, how we can reduce load on our systems. Moving forward, what I would say here is every utility should have a removal replacement program in place, and it should start by saying what exactly is a removal replacement candidate. I think this should be part of every routine inspection. When we go out there, we should be looking for removal replacement candidates. And if I were to provide guidance on how to develop what a candidate should be, I don't like this, well, if I prune it more than 2 times in 5 years, it's a good removal replacement. What I would suggest, we need to stick with what the industry says and what expert guidance gives us. I'll give you one example of expert guidance that I probably use too often, but Dr. Richard Harris, as far as I'm concerned, father of arboriculture, wrote the book Arboriculture. In his book, when talking about trees near power lines, said any tree that requires pruning more than once every 5 years should be removed and replaced. He goes on to explain why that's necessary, and I think you guys know the reasons why that's not a good idea to repeatedly prune trees. It's also, we seek guidance from ANSI standards. We're not supposed to remove a certain percentage of the canopy of trees at any given time. What I am suggesting here is you should have a definition, and it should be as simple as if we have to prune it more than once every five years, it needs to go. Now, I know a lot of you are shaking in your boots because you're on either 3 to 5 year cycles, which means you're pruning all of your trees more than once every 3 to 5 years. These are questions we're going to have to start asking, and we're going to have to start addressing. Moving forward, probably also not another topic that will make a lot of people happy, but what I'm suggesting here is we should start seriously consider filling empty spaces under and adjacent to our power lines. The picture you're looking at on the right is a grove of eucalyptus. This is a ubiquitous picture throughout my county, at least, where somebody plants one eucalyptus tree, and the next thing you know, you have an entire grove. Nothing else grows near eucalyptus trees. These are fast-growing trees. I've documented growth up to 12 feet a year. They don't belong anywhere near power lines. Eucalyptus do not. And what I'm suggesting is that if we don't fill empty spaces, we will, of course, have them filled by either nature, or you'll have some homeowner come around and they'll plant the eucalyptus trees. This is something I think we should all start considering. I think it makes sense that in some cases, not everywhere, I'm not suggesting we do planting underneath every power line out there. What I'm suggesting is there are places we can plant trees that'll benefit us from reduced future maintenance cost, an improvement of carbon sequestration in particular areas. It's a good mutual project. I'd also suggest that we might be able to capitalize this work. This isn't a maintenance function. What I'm suggesting here is if we fill empty spaces, that's an investment in the plant, which means we should be able to capitalize that. And as we all know, capital money is easier to get than expense money. Moving on, I want to talk a bit about defensible space. And granted, this is probably only of interest to those of you that live in fire-prone areas. I would caution all the people, though, to take a look at the history of wildfire in your own particular state, because what you'll find out, I believe, with the exception of Maine, this is a problem elsewhere. It's definitely a problem in Georgia, Alabama, Florida. The entire South has problems with fire. Michigan, Wisconsin. States have problems with wildfires, and it only takes one tree to fall into a power line during a red flag event, and you would be welcome to the California Club, because that's what happened here. So I'm going to be talking about defensible space, and I'll begin by saying I read a report recently from some fire guys up in Washington State, I believe it was, that they said that 80% of the homes that were lost in recent wildfires could have been saved with proper defensible space. Now, that kind of grates me because of what I know about the laws and how much enforcement is being done by fire agencies in enforcing defensible space. People who build homes in fire-prone areas in many states are required to comply with specific requirements. Here in California, California Public Resource Code Section 4291, I believe, defines specifically what defensible space is. The problem is, here in California, we're not seeing it enforced. The fire agencies love to spend a lot of time with utilities looking for clearances between trees and power lines, but I have yet to get a good answer for how often they're actually inspecting for compliance with defensible space. Here's a point I want to stress, and it goes, I'd said it earlier, but at the end of the day, even though that's not our responsibility, it's not our problem, we're going to get sued for it. I'd ask you, how would you feel sitting in front of your CEO if you asked him this simple question? What would you rather pay for, 100 homes burnt to the ground or 20 homes burnt to the ground? I think the answer is going to be, I want it to be 20. We have a vested interest in managing the utility force to make sure that defensible space is part of those considerations. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. What's my core message today? We need to stop thinking in cycles and clearances, and we need to think in terms of landscapes and legacies. If we were to fully implement these with vigor and a great deal of investment, which I'll talk about here in a minute, we could all but eliminate tree-related outages. We did it on the transmission system. We could all but eliminate the threat of fires and PSPS events and having to deal with wildfire mitigation plans to the extent we do right now. We would eliminate accidents too. It's hard to get electrocuted if you're climbing a tree that doesn't come anywhere near the high voltage or energized lines. And quite frankly, we would eliminate the cost overruns we repeated. We'd have more predictable future if we knew what our utility forest was doing out there. And of course, the environmental losses. And by that, I mean, there is an environmental toll that results from all of these massive wildfire conflagrations that have occurred in the Western United States and Canada and Australia for that matter. I think that all signs basically point to the fact we need a new approach to this. Yes, it'll cost more money at first, but if we invest in this, as I mentioned earlier, we'll see fewer outages, fewer wildfires, fewer fatalities, a significant reduction in long-term costs, which are right now heading in the trajectory of going much, much, much more higher. And we'll have stronger environmental outcomes, particularly if we pay attention to things like trees for energy conservation and planting more trees out there. At the end of the day, what I'm suggesting is, yes, we need to spend more money right now, but what we end up with a healthier, smarter utility forest. One more thing about costs here. In the report, I do spend quite a bit of time talking about what it'll actually cost. And in short, I'll leave you this. Yes, it's going to be a dramatic increase in how much money is spent in, for lack of a better term, re-landscaping out there, because that's really what I'm suggesting here. While it'll cost a lot more money, when you look at the cost of outages and the costs of fires, even in separate categories, it'll cost less money than per customer cost for wildfires and per customer cost for outages. And that's kind of detailed in the report, which brings me to the last slide here. I'm looking forward to any questions you may have. I believe I'm going to go live here after this video plays. Be more than happy to answer any questions. And more importantly, I really want some feedback. You know, we're very vocal when we get face to face with each other, but I would like more candid feedback. If you disagree with it, I'm perfectly fine. I'll put the battery on my shoulder and say, let's debate the issue. So my closing comment is thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you want a copy of the report, don't have it, feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email at steve@utilityarbors.net. Look me up on LinkedIn. You can send me a message there. And once again, look forward to you all taking a look at the final report, Proactive Strategies for UVM. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks.